The morning of Liana's engagement smelled like jasmine oil and firewood smoke. Her mother had braided her hair before sunrise, weaving small white flowers between the plaits, and the whole village of Dharam Hollow was already humming with preparation. It was a good day. Everyone said so. Liana sat alone in her room for just one quiet moment. She picked up the bronze mirror her grandmother had given her, old and round, with a wooden handle worn smooth from many hands. She held it up and looked at her face. Her reflection looked back. Then she raised her right hand to fix a loose braid. Her reflection did not move. Liana blinked. The reflection did not blink. She lowered her hand slowly. The reflection stayed still, arm raised, eyes wide open, watching her. Her heart stopped. Then it started again, too fast. She stepped to the left. Her reflection did not step with her. It remained in the center of the mirror, perfectly still. Liana opened her mouth and screamed. Her mother came running, pushing the door open with both hands. What happened? Liana pointed at the mirror with a trembling finger. Her mother took it, looked into it. She saw only herself, as a mirror should show. But behind her, inside that bronze frame, the reflection slowly turned its head toward Liana. Dharam Hollow was the kind of village where mornings felt like gifts. The river sang between smooth stones. Children chased each other along red dirt paths, while elders sat under old trees and chanted blessings for the new day. The farms were green and generous. The air smelled of earth and rain. On this morning, the whole village was awake early because of Liana's engagement. Women cooked rice and groundnut soup in large pots. Young men carried firewood in bundles. Children strung colored cloth between fence posts to celebrate. In Dharam Hollow, mirrors were sacred objects. They were polished carefully before every ceremony. Elders said mirrors held the ancestors' eyes, that the dead watched through them during important moments. So on this day, every mirror in the village had been wiped clean and placed where light could touch it. The villagers adored Liana. She was soft-spoken and hard-working. She greeted elders first and helped neighbors without being asked. Everyone agreed she deserved this happiness. But as Liana helped carry ceremonial water jars to the preparation ground, she passed a large clay jar filled with still water. She glanced down at her reflection. The girl staring back at her was facing the wrong way. Her reflection stood with its back turned, as if looking at something behind her that only it could see. Liana told herself it was tiredness. She told herself the jar was crooked. She told herself many things, because the mind will do anything rather than accept what frightens it. But that afternoon, a small girl named Ino came to find her. Ino was 7 years old, gap-toothed, and known in the village for saying exactly what she saw. She pulled Liana's wrapper and pointed at a polished cooking pot nearby. "Look," she whispered. Liana looked. Her reflection in the pot stood perfectly still while she moved. "She didn't move," Ino said quietly. "Your face didn't move." Liana felt cold despite the afternoon sun. The child was seeing it too. It was not tiredness. It was not a crooked jar. By sunset, the whispers had spread from the cooking grounds to the market path to the elder's tree. People passed the story the way fire passes through dry grass, quickly and without asking permission. "Liana's reflection is strange," they said. "I heard it faces the wrong way. I heard it doesn't move at all." Some people laughed. Some prayed quietly. Some watched Liana differently when she walked past. That night, Liana sat in her room and wept. She did not know why. She only knew something was very wrong. When she finally looked into the bronze mirror through her tears, her reflection did not cry. It smiled. Rahim the blacksmith was a large man with a loud laugh and a habit of explaining everything. He had fixed 3 broken axles that week alone, and he approached most problems the way he approached broken metal, with heat, force, and the firm belief that everything had a rational cause. "Fear," he announced the next morning at the well, waving his large hand. "That is all this is. A girl is nervous about her engagement, and in nervous I sees strange things." People nodded, because Rahim's confidence was contagious. So that afternoon, Rahim organized a small test. He carried the bronze mirror to the center of the compound, where 10 villagers stood watching. He held the mirror before each person. One by one, their reflections moved perfectly, blinking, turning, behaving as reflections should. Then he held the mirror before Liana. The reflection froze. Liana turned her head. The reflection did not turn. Liana raised her hand. The reflection did not raise its hand. For a full count of 10 breaths, the reflection simply stood inside the frame, watching her with flat, quiet eyes. Rahim said nothing. The villagers murmured. Nobody laughed now. That evening, a woman who had looked closely during the test came running back to the group with wide eyes. On the reflection's wrist, she had noticed something. A faint bruise, dark and shaped like fingers, as if someone had gripped it very hard. Grandmother Suri held no official title and sat at no council. But people went to her for things they could not take to councils. Things that lived between the physical and the spiritual, in the narrow space where reason stopped working. She was very old. Her face was folded into itself like worn leather, and her eyes were the color of river water in the dry season, pale brown and very deep. She asked Liana to bring the mirror at dawn, before anyone else was awake. Liana came alone. Suri held the mirror carefully, tilting it in the early light, studying it the way a person studies a letter written in a language they half remember. Mirrors remember, she said finally. They do not forget what people bury. She spoke of ancestral debts, of old accounts left unpaid, of spirits who could not rest because the living refused to speak the truth they needed spoken. She said some mirrors carried more than reflections. They carried memory. Liana listened with her hands pressed together. "What is it trying to show me?" she asked. Suri did not answer immediately. She looked at the mirror once more. Then she set it down quickly, stepping back from it. Inside the frame, the reflection's mouth was moving, slowly, deliberately, shaping one silent word. Come. Liana stopped going to the river after the mirror incident. But that morning, her mother sent her to fetch water because the younger children were sick and needed bathing. Liana carried the clay pot on her head and walked quickly, keeping her eyes on the path and not on anything that might reflect her back at herself. She reached the riverbank and knelt to fill the pot. She looked down. Her reflection in the river did not ripple. Even as the current moved around her, as leaves floated past, as the surface broke and reformed, Liana's reflection stood perfectly still in the water, not kneeling, standing upright, arms at its sides, watching her with an expression she could not name. Fish scattered suddenly, darting away from the bank as if the water near her had gone cold. A group of children who had been washing their feet nearby looked once, then ran home without speaking. Liana did not move for a long moment. She stared at the reflection. The reflection stared back. Then the sound came. From somewhere behind her, soft and close and completely impossible laughter. Gentle, girlish, familiar. The exact sound of her own laugh, the one she made when something delighted her. But her mouth was shut and her throat was silent. The sound wrapped around her like cold water. She ran home without filling the pot. That night, sleep came for Liana too quickly, like hands pressing her down into darkness before she was ready. She dreamed of running. She was a young girl again, maybe 6 or 7 years old, her feet bare against cool grass, her hair loose and flying. She was laughing. And beside her, just at the edge of the dream, just past where she could fully see, another girl ran with her. Same height, same bare feet, same loose hair flying. She could not see the other girl's face. Every time she turned to look, the girl was already ahead, always half a step further than Liana's eyes could catch. They were running toward the river. Liana woke gasping, sitting straight up in the dark of her room, her chest heaving. She looked down at herself. Her feet were covered in mud, fresh mud, red and cool, the same dark red mud that lived only along the river bend. She had not left her bed. She was certain. She remembered lying down. She remembered closing her eyes. And yet, the mud was real. The smell of the river was real. She pressed her fingers into it, and it smeared between them, cold and thick. She looked at the bronze mirror across the room. Inside it, the hem of her reflection's dress was soaked, dark and dripping, as if it had been standing in deep water. The market in Durham Hollow happened every 3 days. People came from surrounding farms and smaller paths, spreading goods on woven mats, talking and catching up on everything they had missed. On normal market days, Liana loved it. This was not a normal market day. Word of the mirror and the river had traveled the way all stories in small villages travel, faster than feet and wider than roads. People watched Liana differently now. Conversations lowered when she passed. Children were pulled closer by their mothers. The warmth that Durham Hollow had always offered her felt thin, like cloth worn too many times. It happened near the grain cellars. A polished brass tray caught the morning light, and Liana walked past it. A woman screamed. Every head turned. Liana's reflection in the tray had frozen solid while she kept walking. It stood in the tray's surface as she moved 5 steps past it, unmoving, upright, watching. The market went silent. An elder who had been watching from his stool stood slowly and walked to Liana's mother. He spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. Her engagement must be postponed, he said. The ancestors are not settled. Later, walking home, Liana heard an older woman murmur to another while glancing in her direction. Just 2 words, heavy as stones dropped into still water. 20 years. 3 days after the market, the sky turned the color of old bruises, green and purple in ways that made the animals restless. Goats would not eat. The village dogs moved in tight circles. Elders looked to the clouds and did not speak, which was more frightening than anything they could have said. The storm came at midnight. It was not the kind of storm that announces itself politely. It arrived like something that had been holding its breath for a long time and finally let go. Rain hit the rooftops like thrown stones. Wind tore cloth from fences and scattered cooking fires. Lightning split the sky again and again over the river, turning the darkness briefly white. One strike hit very close to the river bend. The sound shook the earth beneath people's feet. The ancestral shrine at the edge of the village, built from old stones and sacred river clay, cracked down the center during the night. In the morning, the elders stood before it in silence, their faces unreadable. But it was not the cracked shrine that stopped everyone's hearts. It was what the storm had done to the riverbank. The heavy rain had carved into the earth along the bend, eroding soil that had sat undisturbed for a very long time. And from that freshly opened earth, washed clean by rain and pale in the early morning light, small bones had emerged. Nobody wanted to touch them. They stood in a half circle around the small exposed bones, men, women, elders, the young, and said nothing for a long time. The river moved quietly beside them, as if it too was waiting. Grandmother Suri bent slowly and looked without touching. Her face showed nothing, but her hands gripped her walking stick so tightly her knuckles lightened. "A child," she said simply. "These are a child's bones." The silence that followed was not the silence of people with nothing to say. It was the silence of people with too much to say and nowhere safe to say it. Some elders exchanged looks that held old conversation in them, the kind shared between people who already know the answer but are hoping the question won't be asked. Liana had followed the crowd to the riverbank. She stood at the back behind taller shoulders, and then something pulled her forward, not her feet, but something deeper. She pushed through the circle until she could see. When her eyes found the bones, her knees gave out. Her mother was beside her in an instant, catching her by the arm, pulling her upright. Liana's mouth opened. A name began to form on her lips, just one sound, barely a breath, the beginning of a name. M. Her mother's hand covered her mouth before the name could finish. That night, Liana and her mother sat across from each other at the low table in their home. The oil lamp burned between them. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Liana said, "Tell me." Her mother's eyes filled but did not spill. She had practiced keeping things inside for so long that even grief obeyed her. She folded her hands on the table and stared at them. "There was another child," she said. Her voice was flat and careful, the way a person speaks when they are using every bit of strength just to keep their voice from breaking. "Before you became who you are now, there was another child." "Who?" Liana asked. It was sickness, her mother said quickly, as if the word could stop the next question. Long ago. She was sick. These things happened. What was her name? Her mother did not answer. The whole village agreed never to speak of it. Her mother said instead. It was better that way. Better for the family. Better for everyone. We grieved and we moved forward. Liana stared at her. No one ever spoke of her again, her mother whispered. That was the agreement. The lamp flickered. In the bronze mirror across the room, the reflection raised its arm slowly and turned its face toward the lamp. On its forehead was a scar, thin and curved, that had never been there before. 3 days after her mother's confession, Liana found herself unable to sit still. She moved through the house, touching things, putting them down, picking them up again. Something was pulling her, not to the river, not to the mirror, but to a wooden chest that had sat in the back room her entire life. It was old, heavy, sealed with a rusted clasp that resisted her fingers until she pressed harder. Inside were folded wrappers, small tools, dried flowers, the kinds of things families keep for no reason except that throwing them away feels wrong. She moved through the layers carefully, and near the bottom, wrapped in a piece of plain cloth, she found a thin bracelet, copper, darkened with age, small enough to have been made for a child's wrist. She turned it over in her fingers. 2 initials had been carved on the inside of the band. The first was L. The second initial had been carved clearly once, then scratched out, pressed over so hard the metal was rough and raw where it had been erased. Liana sat down slowly on the floor, holding the bracelet in her open palm. And something came back to her. Not a full memory, more like the shape of one. The feeling of small footsteps walking beside hers, a second pair of feet matching her own rhythm, step for step, from before she could remember anything clearly. It began with the bronze mirror, then the river, then every clay pot, every polished tray, every still puddle after rain. Now in every surface that reflected light, the other girl stood. She was not mimicking Liana anymore. She was not copying her movements or following her gestures the way a reflection is supposed to do. She simply stood, upright, separate, her own presence, and watched. Liana could see her clearly now. The same height, the same face, nearly, but something different in the eyes. Something that had been in a dark place for a long time and had learned patience there. People around the village noticed. A woman coming to borrow salt saw it in the water jar by the door and did not come back. 2 young men who had been friends with Liana's intended came to the compound and left again quickly, eyes wide, saying nothing. Liana stopped trying to explain. There was nothing left to explain. The evidence was everywhere. That evening at sunset, she stood before the bronze mirror alone. The other girl stood inside it, watching as always. But now something was different. Slowly, deliberately, the girl inside the mirror raised her hand. She placed it flat against the inside of the glass and pressed. The surface of the mirror rippled outward like water disturbed by a single finger. It happened at the river. Liana had gone against her own judgment, drawn there by a pull she was beginning to understand had nothing to do with her own will. She stood at the bank and looked down. The other girl looked up from the water, same as always, watching, waiting. But this time, Liana leaned forward without meaning to. Her body simply bent toward the water on its own, the way a tree bends in wind, the way a person tips forward when the ground beneath their feet suddenly tilts. She felt the pull like a hand grabbing the front of her dress, drawing her down toward the surface. The reflection lunged upward. Arms reached up through the water toward her face. Liana screamed. 2 men working nearby heard her and sprinted to the bank. They grabbed her by the arms and pulled her back hard, stumbling away from the edge. She fell onto the red earth, gasping, her knees wet, her hands shaking. She did not fall in. She was safe. But for one terrible moment, her fingers had touched the river's surface, and she had felt fingers reaching back. That evening, Grandmother Suri came to the compound without being called. She stood in the doorway and looked at Liana for a long time. "This will not wait much longer," she said quietly. Whatever is buried must be spoken before the next moon is full. The full moon was 3 nights away. Grandmother Suri gathered the family and 3 elder women in the compound. They sat in a circle as the night settled around them, and Suri spoke without rushing, the way old people speak when they want every word to land properly. "There are things the living owe the dead," she said. "Not prayers, not sacrifices. Truth. Simply the truth, spoken out loud, in front of witnesses. When truth is buried beside a body, the spirit cannot move. It stays in the place between, pressing against the boundary, looking for a way to be heard." She looked at Liana's mother when she said this. Her mother kept her eyes on the ground. "If this truth is not spoken before the moon fills," Suri continued, "then balance will look for another way to restore itself. It will take what it is owed." In the bronze mirror propped against the compound wall, the reflection watched the gathering. Its mouth was moving. Liana stared until she could read the shape of the word it kept repeating. "Remember." And then, like something unlocking quietly inside her chest, a memory surfaced, clear and sudden and real. 2 identical faces, side by side, looking back from a single mirror long ago. 2 little girls, the same in every way. She had not always been alone in her reflection. The name came back first. Mara. It surfaced the way names do when buried too long, not slowly, but all at once, like something pressed underwater, finally kicking free. Mara. The sound of it felt worn inside Liana's mouth, like a word her lips had shaped many times before. She remembered the weight of another small body sleeping beside her. She remembered 2 pairs of feet slapping mud in the rainy season. She remembered voices, her own voice, and another one, just a half-note different, laughing, arguing, telling secrets in the dark. She had a twin sister. They had been inseparable. 2 girls who finished each other's sentences, who cried when the other was hurt, who communicated in looks that no one else could read. Until one night, Liana pressed her hands to her temples, holding the memory in place. The river. They had gone to the river at night. She could feel the cool grass under her feet, excitement and fear mixed together, the way only childhood mischief mixes them. And she remembered, just at the edge of it, reaching toward something in Mara's hand. A charm. A small lucky charm. The memory stopped there, like a door she was not yet ready to open. The second night, more came back. In the dream, feeling less like a dream now, and more like memory wrapped in darkness, she was 8 years old. Mara stood beside her on the path behind the compound, both of them whispering, both glancing back to make sure no adult had followed. They were going to the river. The elders kept a sacred charm near the water, a smooth stone wound with red thread, said to carry ancestral favor. Children were forbidden from touching it. That, of course, was precisely why they wanted to. But along the way, they argued. Liana wanted to hold it first. Mara had found it first. Liana said she was older by 7 minutes. Mara said 7 minutes meant nothing. Their voices rose. Jealousy, small and hot, crept between them. At the bank, Mara held the charm over the water, teasing, knowing Liana would grab for it. Liana grabbed for it. Liana woke before the next part came. She sat in the darkness, breathing hard, her hands trembling. She did not want to remember what came next, but she could already feel the shape of it, waiting just inside the closed door of her mind. A shove, a slip, a scream. The truth did not announce itself. It came quietly, in the space between one breath and the next, in the hour before dawn when the world is most honest. Mara had grabbed for the charm at the same moment. They had both grabbed. A small fear struggle, the kind that only happens between people completely unafraid of each other. Then the bank, wet from the day's rain, betrayed them. Mara slipped. Liana heard the splash before she could stop it. She heard Mara's hands slapping the surface. She looked over the edge and saw her sister in the dark water, eyes wide, reaching up. And Liana had hesitated. She was afraid. Not of the water, she could swim. She was afraid of punishment. They had snuck out. They had touched something sacred. If she called for help, adults would come, and both would be in trouble. She hesitated too long. Then she ran home. She told herself Mara would find the bank. She told herself it wasn't deep. She kept telling herself until the telling became a wall she could live behind. For 20 years, she had lived behind it. In the bronze mirror, the reflection's eyes were wet and furious. When Liana looked at her mother that morning and said, "I remember all of it," her mother did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had waited for a door to open for 20 years and stopped hoping it ever would. The elders came that evening, the oldest ones, who had lived long enough to carry the secret. They admitted it quietly, the way people confess things they are ashamed of, looking at the floor, using careful words. They had known. When Mara's small body was found the next morning, caught at the bend where the current slowed, they had gathered privately. Together, they decided, to protect the family's honor, they would say sickness. To protect the village's peace, they would bury Mara near the river, unmarked, unnamed. No stone, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that she had ever existed. "We believed we were protecting everyone," one elder said. No one responded. Outside, the river was rising. The elders checked the sky, perfectly clear. No rain had fallen in 3 days. The river rose anyway. People noticed Liana changing. Small things, the kind you notice only when you have known a person for a long time. She would reach for a cup, and her hand would stop halfway, as if receiving instructions from elsewhere. She would begin to speak, then pause, not searching for words, but listening to a second voice beneath her own. In daylight now, the reflection moved on its own. Servants saw it. Neighbors saw it. The reflection walked when Liana stood still. It turned when Liana faced forward. It was no longer borrowing her shape. It was using it. Liana sometimes heard her own voice coming from rooms she was not in, speaking words she had not thought to say. "Mara," she said aloud one afternoon, alone in the compound. For the first time in 20 years, the name was in the open air. "Mara, I hear you." At sunset, when the light fell long across the ground, Liana looked at her shadow. There were 2 of them, side by side, the same length, the same shape, 2 shadows from one body, stretched dark across the red earth, pointing toward the river like fingers showing the way. On the night of the full moon, the entire village came to the river. Some came because Grandmother Suri had walked door to door at sundown, leaving no room for argument. Some came because the river was still rising without rain, and a river that rises without rain has a reason. Some came because they were afraid to stay home alone. They carried torches. The flames bent in wind that seemed to rise from the water itself. Suri led them to where the small bones had been found. The cloth covering them was lifted now. Liana walked to the front. Her legs were unsteady, but they moved. She knelt in the red earth beside her sister's bones and placed both hands flat on the ground. Then she spoke. She said Mara's name loudly, clearly, so the trees and the water and the sky could hear it. She said what she had done that night. She said she had been afraid and had run and had hidden behind silence for 20 years. She said she was sorry. Beneath her hands, the river glowed silver. The mist came off the water slowly. It gathered, curling upward in long soft ribbons, white and pale in the moonlight, the way breath looks on a cold morning. Nobody ran, though several people's feet told them to. The mist thickened and rose and took shape above the water's edge. She was small, 8 years old, exactly as Liana remembered. A round face, familiar in every line, wearing a dress identical to the one from the memory. White, with a thin red border at the hem, soaked from the river. She did not look monstrous. She looked like a child who had been waiting somewhere cold and dark for a long time and had finally found the door. Mara did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply looked at her sister for a long, silent moment. Then she spoke, barely louder than the river, but everyone heard it, the way you hear something that arrives inside you rather than through your ears. "Why did you let them forget me?" She did not look at Liana only. She looked at all of them. The question sat in the air above the torches, and not one person in Durham Hollow could answer it quickly. No one moved. The torches trembled. The river continued its slow rise, lapping against the roots of trees it had never reached before. Then Mara spoke again. "I do not want revenge," she said, and held breath in the crowd released itself. "I was a child. I know what children do when they are afraid. I am not here because of what my sister did." She looked at Liana. Liana was weeping and did not look away. "I am here because of what you all did afterward." The elders felt it, the weight of that sentence on their shoulders. "One child's mistake could have been a wound that healed," Mara said. "But erasing me, sealing my name away, burying my bones without acknowledgement, that is what trapped me. The living chose silence, and silence kept me bound." She turned to face the water. "I am not one girl's burden. I am the burden of a village that chose comfort over truth." The river rose another inch. Water touched the first line of torches. Flame hissed. The riverbank began to disappear beneath the surface. Liana stood. Her legs were shaking, and her face was wet, but she stood. She faced the mist and spoke clearly. "Take me," she said. "If balance must be restored, take me. Not the village. I am the one who ran. I am the one who let her die." A hand grabbed her arm from behind. Then another. Then more. Her mother, Grandmother Suri, a young woman from across the compound, an elder who had held silence for 20 years. "No," her mother said. "No," the elder said. "It is not hers alone to carry." He turned to the river and the watching spirit and the rising water, and he said his part. What he had known. What he had agreed to. "Why?" Another elder spoke. Then another. A woman who had kept the secret as a neighbor. A man who had helped dig the nameless grave. One after another they confessed, not beautifully, not without shame. They stumbled over words, and their voices broke. But every word was true. The river stopped rising. The water pulled back slowly, 1 inch, then another, returning to where it belonged. Dawn came quietly, letting the light speak for itself. The mist had gone before sunrise. Mara had not disappeared dramatically. She faded, the way a candle fades when morning makes it unnecessary, going softly, as if she finally had somewhere else to be. Liana walked home slowly. In her room, the bronze mirror waited. She stood before it and raised her right hand. Her reflection raised its right hand. She blinked. It blinked. She stepped left. It stepped left. Every movement answered as it should have been answered from the beginning. And behind her reflection, barely visible in the pale morning light, a second shape stood, smaller, already fading. Mara, watching one last time. Her face was peaceful. Her mouth curved in a small half-smile that looked exactly like Liana's. Then she was gone. A shrine was built beside the river. 2 names carved into stone. No initial scratched out. And in Durham Hollow, when someone is tempted to bury a hard truth, the elders say only this: when truth is buried, it becomes a ghost. When truth is spoken, it becomes a blessing.